So we're going to start with competency, and we said 2, right?
Yes.
So competency 1 is your knowledge of human growth and development. What is normal development cognitively, emotionally, socially, how to utilize your understanding of little human beings and how they're growing and how to best, create instruction for them. And you did okay in that one, in that part of domain 1, competency 1. The human developmental processes, utilizing that knowledge to plan instruction and assessment. So let's go to competency 2, which was one of your lower areas. And this competency is concerning, and I'm going to take out my little annotation device so that we can analyze this. So in competency 2, the overarching theme is understanding student diversity. Competency 2, if I had to sort of like paraphrase it, what it's all about thematically, it would be about student diversity and how the teacher understands and knows how to plan activities and learning experiences, designing assessments that are responsive to this student diversity, to the differences. That's what student diversity means. Student diversity means all of the differences that you have. And it does not just mean ethnic or cultural differences. It means learning differences, right? Differences in abilities, differences in learning preferences, differences in, gender, language, background, exceptionality. So all of that is different and unique about the specific students in the scenario that they give you for the purposes of the exam and in your classroom for the purposes of real life. Taking that into an account, remember, competency 2 is under the umbrella of domain 1, which is all about you designing instruction and assessment that promotes student learning. And so this is you taking your knowledge of your students' specific differences, their diversity, and how that might affect and or help them, and creating learning experiences, creating activities, designing assessments that are responsive to those differences so that you are promoting all the students' learning. And I'll give you an example of how we would do that for not just for the learning experiences, but also for the assessments. So let's say that I am trying to demonstrate as a teacher my acknowledgement, my knowledge of my student diversity. And I know I have a lot of students that are tactile learners. That means that in my lessons, in my learning experiences, it behooves me to make sure no matter what I teach, whether it's theater, whether it's math, whether it's science, that I am integrating activities that meet the needs, the learning needs, and the learning preferences of my students. And the reason I should be doing this is because students learn better. Their learning experiences become solidified to acquired knowledge when we teach to how they learn and to who they are. If they don't see themselves represented in a classroom, mirrored in a classroom, the learning experience is going to resonate less. Those neurological pathways that we need to form via our experiences and the lessons we give and their practice, they're not going to happen if they don't see themselves valued, reflected, apparent in the learning environment, in the learning experiences, in the learning activities. So if the teacher knows that I am a tactile learner but doesn't care because she doesn't want anyone out of her seat, she doesn't like messing with snips of paper, so she doesn't do any foldables, anything with cardboard, because of her personal preferences as a teacher. The rest of the class's learning experiences, their preferences are denied. That cannot be the case for a TEXES teacher. Our preferences always come second to the needs and preferences of the student. Because we know that science says if we don't teach them and engage in this way, the learning experiences are going to be less meaningful. They're not going to be experiences where the knowledge is going to be retained later on and be retrievable later on, which means they don't really learn it. They might go through the motions in the classroom, but if they're asked to recall it years later, it's not going to happen. If we understand student diversity and we plan for their learning experiences to include their needs in all of their diverse needs, because it's not just one, it's not just thinking about how they're different in one way, it's how are they unique and different, and how best do they learn, and how can I create experiences that are inclusive to all of the needs of the students. So we're just going to read through this one. Demonstrates knowledge of students with diverse personal and social characteristics. Diverse personal and social. And these are some examples. Related but not limited to ethnicity and culture, gender, language background, exceptionality, and the significance of student diversity for teaching, learning, and assessment. Diversity is always important. I try to, in the beginning of the year, really sort of sell in a very aggressive campaign ad in my classroom the benefits of diversity, even on a biological level. There are people who suffer from intestinal issues, and it is because of their lack of biodiversity within their intestines. And so one of the treatments that's working and has been working for some decades is introducing bacteria from someone else's colon into the colon of the patient in order to sort of snap the digestive system back into a working system. Because if there's not enough biodiversity of germs within the colon, within the digestive system, it does not function. It cannot do the job that it needs to be done. We saw it through history with the royalty, and they wanted to preserve sort of the royal blood and the pureness. And so they literally discriminated against any biodiversity in their genes. And as a result, became very sick, and their lineage, started to die off. So thriving happens in a diverse atmosphere. All organisms, they bloom and they thrive in a diverse environment, in a diverse atmosphere. So too is that true for the instruction and the learning experiences, and even the way that you put together your cooperative learning groups. If everyone in the cooperative learning groups, they're all friends, their parents, are friends, they go to the same church, they vacation together, they have the same experiences, there's not going to be a lot of different perspective when you're talking about a topic and the conversation and the dialogue. So what we mean by carefully crafting your cooperative learning groups is making sure that you have a diverse group of students, different socioeconomic levels, different language proficiencies, so that you have native English speakers who can help those that are English language learners within there, in addition to talking about content and doing the activity. You want them to be like different gender perspectives, different background and exceptionality, have really high achievers with those who struggle in the same group. The days of saying, okay, everybody get in groups of 4 and letting students will always choose their friends, and their friends are typically going to have the same experiences, likes, interests. That's why they're friends. And you're going to have less of a meaningful dialogue, less lenses with which to see certain topics or to digest the content material. So diversity helps us in so many different ways. And when we're planning, we need to plan diverse experiences for our students. So that means making sure that we have video and audio experiences for our video and audio learners, that we include aspects of the student's background, possibly even their needs, within the classroom, that they're reflected in the classroom. I one year was so proud of the way I, teachers at the beginning of the school year, a week before school, we put together our classrooms with many times before we know who our students are. So one year we were going to do a lot of group work. It was a writing teacher. We're going to do a lot of peer editing. So the desks were already grouped and very nice and neatly done. It looked amazing. I had 2 students that year that utilized wheelchairs, ambulatory devices. And so this was just a matter, and this would be domain 2, your classroom environment, not competency 2, but still has to do, there's overlap here, the diversity. I needed to be flexible in my arrangements to make sure that I accommodated my students that needed to be part of groups and that were in wheelchairs. And so that meant changing the whole shebang once I found out who my kids were and what they needed. Which means if you are a TEXES teacher and you are working on your lesson plans for next year, they better just be skeletal and not super duper specific. Activities, strategies, all of those things should be chosen and identified based on competencies 1, 2, 3, and 4, based on the needs of the people you have in your classroom, using the knowledge of what you know theoretically about the way humans learn, K through 12, and then assessing the humans you have for the purpose of the exam in the scenario, right? Looking at the hints, what grade level are they at? What needs linguistically do they have? Did they specify other learning needs like kinesthetic or auditory? So assessing the students you have and then choosing what activities would work best with these kids who are mostly kinesthetic and auditory. If you plan in the summer before you meet your students, before you've ever given, and you can't do it after you even get a roster, that's not good enough. You have to know your kids to know how best to plan instruction for them. Now, in the beginning of the school year, we have to do all hands on deck about getting to build the relationship and learning who they are and what they need. And where they are in their proficiency, in language proficiency, and also in your content area. And we do that by giving them assessments to see what they know, and assessments to check for understanding after we've given a lesson. So the way that you would utilize assessments in a diverse way, in a meaningful, diverse way, would be, let's say your students have different strengths, and you're trying to assess whether they comprehended a text. You can have them write a summary. You can have them, do an oral response to you via video or technology, or in class, like explain, this is what happened, like this is the author's use of diction to prove this tone, and so giving them different ways to show you what they know in a choice, providing agency. Let me say I'm better at talking and I feel like I could explain it better than I could write it down. Now, if I were to be assessing their writing skills, clearly I wouldn't be able to give them a choice of like making a video or speaking it, or possibly doing like a drawing or a collage. But if they're creative and they understand, and I'm just checking for understanding, why not utilize their diverse skills, interests, desires, learning preferences in order to assess what they know? It's giving them more opportunity, choices to show you what they know, more opportunity to shine for you, to show you their understanding, to promote their understanding. And so accepts, respects student with diverse backgrounds and needs, knows how to use diversity in the classroom and the community to enrich learning experiences. Remember, I said the students have to see themselves reflected in the learning experiences. Okay, strategies for enhancing one's own understanding of students' diverse backgrounds and needs. Professional development, reading about it. If I get a student and they come from a country that I am unfamiliar with, regardless of their language proficiency, I need to research it. It is literally my job to now become an expert in that culture so that I know what things I can utilize as prior knowledge if need be in my lessons. How can I, help the student make connections between a new culture and possibly even a new language if I have not taken the time to research or to become knowledgeable in the student's diverse background and therefore their needs, right? I can't help them if I don't know where they're coming from. Knows how to plan and adapt lessons to address students, again, backgrounds, their skills. Remember, if they're really good speakers, then utilize that in your planning of activities. If they're really good with technology, utilize that a lot in your activities. Make it to where your activities have multiple choices. You can do this, or that. That way you can choose what skill you can shine best with to show me you mastered this objective. Utilizing their interests, taking their interests into consideration, or allowing them to sort of marry interests with the activity or the content is going to give you the students internal intrinsic motivational buy-in because they're interested in it already. Utilizing their learning needs, the needs of second language acquisition learners, English language learners, and never forgetting students with disabilities, taking that into consideration when you are planning learning experiences and designing your assessments. So for the purposes of the exam, you'll be able to tell in the scenario if it's a competency 2 question. They're going to talk about a diverse population, or differences among the students, or different backgrounds, or different language levels, or different socioeconomics. You're going to have differing diversity. And so you should know you need to be mindful, and that you need to be not only respectful, but reflective of inclusive in those differences in your planning of the instruction, activities, experiences, and assessments. Understands cultural and socioeconomic differences, including differential access to technology. Very important. Our students are not across the board. They don't have equal access to technology. Not everybody has home access to internet. I mean, that's shocking to some people, but not everybody does. Some kids still have to go to the public library, or go to their grandma's, or go to their tias to use. So just keeping that in mind when you are creating your lessons and your activities. If you know kids at home don't have equal access to technology, then please don't be creating assignments or activities or projects that need access at home in mass. If you know it's going to create an issue, it is going to make it difficult for your students, and therefore it's going to might impede their ability to complete it and to succeed in those learning experiences. So what you would do is make sure that you create activities during the day, and that you have access to maybe the school lab or take home computers. For the purposes of a PPR exam, this is a theoretical exam, and you should have access to everything in theory. But in the real world, we know that it's limited. Students come from different socioeconomic backgrounds. And so I did have sometimes where I would have a project that maybe some students would go all out and buy all this stuff for, but their grade was not going to be contingent on the bells and whistles. But that didn't mean that I wasn't going to make sure that my other students, those that came from lower socioeconomics, were able to create projects that they could be proud of that had bells and whistles with it. That meant that I had to go to public libraries in McAllen, Edinburgh, and FAR, and ask them, do you guys have magazines that you want to, like, I'd go to doctor's offices. They throw away magazines all the time, and tell them, don't throw them away, just keep them for me and I'll come back and I'll get them. so that I could take them to my classroom and we can cut them up, so that when we did things that needed projects, that needed pictures, that needed like, pretty lettering, they could use magazines to find words and things. And I found workarounds. I printed things out. We went to the computer lab, and so that took donations, so that I made sure that the learning experiences and the activities and the assessments and assignments that I assigned and created in my design, in my lesson plan, were not going to be at the detriment of the student's socioeconomic level, that I took that into consideration. Acknowledging cultural things. There's some schools that are really good about not assigning homework on Wednesdays because they know that they have a really large population that attends religious services, and that they get out of class, or whatever it is, their church, and then CCD at certain times, and then maybe they won't be able to do that. So just taking the lives and personhood of the people that you have, where they come from, and taking that into consideration. It's certainly not going to dictate everything, but there are limitations to what we can do based on who we have in our classroom. Okay, Mr. Tovar, do you have any questions thus far?
No, I'm just noting down notes as you go along. But yeah, it's true. I mean, I've seen it. I've done it too. I mean, on magazines, I go around and I ask, especially mine, that sometimes. I mean, we do have a budget, we do have all that stuff, but sometimes it's like, no, but there's really anything.
Well, it's never enough. The budget is never enough.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's always, we can always do more. And so, especially with our population of students, we have to find workarounds to make sure that they still get rich learning experiences and activities and projects that they can be proud of, and that have equal access to it, regardless of their financial background or anything else.
Well, I get out now. I'm getting it. Like, the different, like all of the technology, the socioeconomic, with the different students. I would think, I would only focus in a certain group of students, but now it's like more open. I'm like, oh shit, like I was forgetting all this.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so much to what's diverse,
Yeah.
I mean, it even gets to like more diverse and sad, like where you have a portion of kids that are homeless, right? Those kids, if that is a part of their existence, then that is a new diversity that you have in your student makeup, with its own sets of challenges, where you have to take that into consideration, and so if that is part of your diversity in your classroom, being knowledgeable of it, empathetic, and flexible in your design of learning experiences and assessments, it makes all the difference. Students need to feel like they matter, and one of the easiest ways is by really seeing who they are and having them see themselves and their needs reflected in the classroom. That is the surest way. If you make a student feel like they matter, they will go above and beyond to reach past your goals, because you believe in them. And so a lot of this has to do with you creating things that would sort of verbalize that to them. So H and I, very important. I'd like to bring your attention to them because they are, if you had to sort of,
okay.
You had to put a percentage as to the percentage of the competency that gets tested the most or is like weighted a lot. This here is in respect to our ELL students. ELL. So our English language learners. And so you have to know your English language proficiency standards. So, and in the domains of listening and speaking, as it pertains to beginning, intermediate, advanced, and advanced high levels. You also have to know the English language proficiency standards in the domains of reading and writing as it pertains to beginner, intermediate, advanced, and advanced high. Now, for the purposes of the exam, we typically see questions concerning ELL students at the beginner and the intermediate levels. And the reason we see this is because our ELL students are on this like continuum of proficiency, and it begins with beginner and it ends presumably with advanced high. I'm just going to go to a little visual really quickly. Here it is. So this is sort of why the questions are mostly about intermediate and beginner, because all of this needs so much support, language support, all in here. And here, this very little support, and here. So beginner and intermediates, they need the most language support, linguistic supports in the classroom. And this document, I'm going to go back up to the top so you can see which one it is so great. And I highly suggest you at least read through the sections with the descriptors and the sections that we'll go over right now. Oh, hold on. I don't know why it's too big. Here it is. And it focuses on just what beginners and intermediates need mostly. And the reason it does that is because they need the most support. And so it does a really great job of explaining the listening and reading is receptive and speaking and writing is expressive, and the different stages is that the students go through, the different indicators that we use to identify them at beginner, intermediate, advanced, and advanced high, and the different supports that we give them at the different areas. Now, all ELL instruction, the TA dictates that it's targeted and systematic. And it breaks down what it means by focused, targeted, and systematic by giving you real examples of what you do in order to be a focused teacher for your ELLs. Pre-teaching academic and social vocabulary to support comprehension during instruction. This is so very important, not just for our ELL students, Mr. Tovar, for everyone, for our special ed students, for our gifted and talented students, for our traditional native English speaking students. It's very important to always pre-teach academic content specific vocabulary. For ELLs, that might include social vocabulary too. And it's especially important for you to understand that those that make curriculum, many times those that identify the text that we're going to read, that identify the vocabulary that should be pre-taught before we read a text, many times those textbook creators don't know our particular population of student. Therefore, they cannot always know what words the students will not have in their language bank, what words will impede comprehension during instruction. So very often in my class, I would read from the textbook and I would look at the 5 vocabulary words and I'd start to plan how I was going to direct instruct the content specific vocabulary we would be using, or the vocabulary that would come up in our reading. But in addition to those 5 that the textbook identified, I would identify, and this is me differentiating instruction for not only my ELL students, but for all my students, identify always at least 4 to 5 more either academic or social vocabulary. That just means words that aren't specific to my content area that I think are going to interrupt the understanding of the text, the comprehension of the text. So instead of doing what I'm sure many teachers that use the same textbooks that I used did, just teach the ones that the textbook identified. After I read it, I said, okay, well, my kids aren't going to know, you know, what a hullabaloo is. And so that might confuse them. And so maybe context clues, but just based on their language proficiency, I would be able to know if they're going to get it via context clues or not. And if I might want to just give them a direct instruction of that before we even read it. That way, when we do read it, oh, Miss Alceda told us hullabaloo is a big, big deal, a big noise. Everybody's making a scandalo. So we got that and we understood it. No questions asked. It doesn't impede comprehension or understanding during instruction. That's pre-teaching anything that you know you're going to say or use language-wise that might confuse your students. This is another way to build background, and it helps them comprehend what they're going to do, comprehend the tasks. If you provide more background knowledge, more visual, more, and really think of it like building a trailer to the lesson. And my lesson trailer included any content specific vocabulary we might encounter, any videos to sort of like introduce them to the topic at hand, to get them that motivation or buy-in, or to give them a little bit of knowledge before we start. I mean, think about you going to a movie. Do you want to go to a movie that you don't know anything about? You just have the title and you have no idea what it's about. Do you want to see a movie like that? Or do you want to see a movie, you watch a trailer and, oh, I like that movie, I want to go see it, and that's how you go choose. You don't just choose based on a title. You see and you have a little background and that's interesting to you. So while students can't choose from a menu of lessons, you can give them a little taste, background knowledge, a sort of trailer to know what to expect and to be better equipped for the academic tasks, to be better prepared to engage in the learning experiences and the academic tasks, simply by taking 5 minutes to sort of do an overview of what we're going to be doing today. These are some of the words. This is some, like, connections, and giving them a foothold before you even jump in. It's sort of like putting your toe into the pool before throwing them into it and letting them acclimate a little bit to the temperature. We already discussed the organization of your group configurations. You have to, especially for your English language earners, especially for your special ed students, make sure that you are mindfully crafting your group configurations, that you are not only putting all beginner students in one group together, that it's not going to be fruitful for their group discussions. Beginners don't have enough English language to have fruitful discussions. You need to have a varied grouping of language proficiency within the group so that you can have students that can model English speaking and model vocabulary in use. So you want to have it varied levels. And you are always checking for understanding. If you'll remember, Mr. Tovar, domain 1, again, is about your careful design of instruction and assessment that promotes student learning, all student learning. And so the design of assessment helps form and drive our instruction, the design of the instruction. We have to constantly be gathering data. And we gather data by doing formative and summative assessments. Now, summative assessments are in summary after all learning has taken place. Like after you're done the whole unit, after you're done with the year, this is how you did on all the learning objectives. We use formatives all the time, and they can be informal and formal. And so I can give a quiz to check for understanding, and that's more of a formal formative. And that will still help me check for understanding, see what they need. Do I need to reteach this, or can I move on to the next objective? Or I could be walking around listening to my cooperative learning groups, my group configurations, listening to their dialogue and assessing using an informal formative assessment, checking understanding in that way. That's informal, but it still adds to my collection of data. And you should be consistently collecting data. always checking for understanding where they are with their listening, speaking, reading, and writing. It's not enough just to be checking them for their reading skills. They have to be making progress in all of the areas of language, listening, speaking, reading, and writing, so that they move along those different descriptors in English language proficiency standards, from beginner to intermediate to advanced and advanced high. Okay, so this is a nice little example of some question stems. Question stems are a great strategy to use with your English language learners and special ed students, like I said, even traditional students. And it helps them, utilize and participate in the academic activities when they're getting a foothold on the language. Here you have a descriptor. This is one of your descriptors for your listening, and it's K through 12. You have the descriptors for beginners, for intermediates, advanced, and advanced high. For the PPR exam, you're going to have more questioning about how to be supportive of your beginner students. So pay close attention when they say in the scenario, if they're English language learners, what level they're at, and what kind of task is the teacher trying to help them with? Is she trying to increase their listening skills? Or is she trying to increase their oral language proficiency? If it's that, then it's speaking skills. Or is she trying to increase ELO reading comprehension or writing skills? And so based on what the scenario says and what you've identified as your key words and phrases, that will help you identify the best response, because that's how they trick you. They say, which is the most appropriate response? And they might have given you more than one appropriate response, but one is more appropriate than the other based on those specific hints that they give you in the scenario. What age group are they? What special population? What other diverse descriptors that they give you that would help you make the best instructional or assessment choice for them? So what I like about this document is that here you have listening again, but on this here, it's not the descriptors. It's sort of like a summary of the descriptors here up top, but then it gives you a really nice breakdown of what you can do in the classroom, what teacher supports, and what you should expect to see. What are the student outcomes for beginner students, beginner listeners, and intermediate listeners? And so what can I do to help? What classroom activities can I do to help them move from beginner to intermediate, from intermediate to advanced? And it does that for each of the areas. So Mr. Tovar, I'm going to ask that you later, go through this and really take a look at the different ways in which it changes, the different supports that we offer beginners and intermediates in each of the areas of language.
Is there anything I should look for, like words or anything like, that differ from beginning, intermediate, advanced, or advanced high? Like, I don't know, like maximum or frequent or occasionally minimal, like little.
Well, yes. So yes, that is true. So that you're seeing it there. You just answered your own question. So for all of them, beginners, and we'll go back to the descriptor really quickly for the beginners on listening. For beginners, they struggle. We'll look at the first descriptor, struggle to understand simple conversations. So they have no listening skills for me to say, okay, Mr. Tovar, what would you like to eat for breakfast? Would you like cold cereal or the, peanut butter sandwich? So they don't know what you just said right now. Nothing at all. None of those listening skills. And so, and we're not even talking about osmosis or author's use of tone. We're just saying peanut butter sandwich and dry cereal. And so beginners need maximum, the most support. That means that you are slowing your speech. That means you're doing direct instruction of not just academic specific vocabulary, but social vocabulary. So words like cereal, words like bathroom, words like stapler. And so you're right, maximum, intermediate is frequent. And so you're going to have frequent sort of mistakes. And one of the biggest indicators, especially in writing, is going to be misuse of past tense verbs. So someone, and it's usually an indicator for an English language arts teacher who has to, label them every year or assess their progress via the TELPAS assessment as beginner, intermediate, advanced, and advanced high. One of the indicators for us, one of the most, obvious indicators for a student on progress is their ability to write in narrative form. So talking about something that happened in the past, like the time I did something, accomplished something difficult, or one time I helped somebody overcome a problem. And so talking in a past tense way, if they misuse that, would be indicative of still being in that intermediate and having that frequent, needing that frequent support. So your advanced high is going to need, and I want to say minimal, it's going to be like almost never. And I will say, as an English teacher, as someone who taught, all the way up to AP English seniors, that my ELL advanced high students were always the best writers that I ever had in all of my teaching career. And it's because they had access to, it's such a double the vocabulary, right? To all of their first language vocabulary and everything that they had learned to make them an advanced high student. So they wrote like PhD students, you know what I mean? They really were just, once they get to advanced high, wow. They are at a wow level. So they are going to be, and it is just my personal experience from 16 years of teaching, the advanced high students, listening, speaking, reading, and writing are going to be exactly comparable, if not better, at English than native English speakers. So because they'll have more access to more language than even the native English speakers. Your advanced high are going to need very little supports. And I'm talking about occasional, once in a while, but beginners is all the time, every day. They will still speak in Spanish, mostly, predominantly. Intermediate, you'll have some, maybe every once in a while, that they'll need to ask for clarification, and need a little bit of in their home language, but beginners are going to need most of it before they can move on.
Sounds good. I think I have that one too on the drive.
Yes, you should have this. Okay, so I'm actually gonna have to let you go because I'm gonna have another session in just a little bit, but I'm gonna have a session at 6:30 tomorrow evening. PPR strategies, and we will continue if you like. I can, we ended on we did a deep dive of competency 2. And I'll upload this video for competency 2, and we'll do a deep dive of competency 3 and 4 tomorrow.
Perfect, that works.
Okay, Mr. Tovar, you have a wonderful rest of your evening, and I will see you tomorrow.
Thank you, Mrs. Sada. Appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Thanks a lot.
Yes.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.